Good evening and welcome to Bugajski Hour. Every month I will come from Washington to Tirana to be your host. And together we will examine the most important political issues and dissect the news. What are the global, regional and local developments that affect the lives of all Albanians, both inside and outside Albania? Basically, I am an optimist. I think Albania is an emerging factor in European politics, and if Albanians can develop and modernize their country and the diaspora helps their motherland, then the status of the entire nation will be raised. However, to achieve these goals, tough questions need to be asked and answered by important political personalities. So each month, I will interview a key political figure who has a major impact on the Albanian nation. Today, we kick off Bugajski Hour with Albania's Prime Minister, Sali Berisha. But first, I'll give you my monthly overview of America's perspective on the world. What is Washington thinking? "2012 is election year in the United States. Presidential elections will take place in November, and for the next 10 months, President Barack Obama and his Republican rival will be campaigning for the White House. The Republican candidate will emerge during the coming weeks during the election primaries. This will be a hot presidential campaign focusing primarily on America's stagnant economy, on the ballooning national debt, on high levels of unemployment, and on massive government spending. Foreign policy will take a backseat during the elections, unless, of course, there is a major international crisis which directly affects US national interests. But this highlights, I think, a longer-term danger that America may increasingly restrict its global engagement because of domestic priorities, financial constraints, and public opposition to foreign entanglements, following the costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many US citizens are frustrated with too much foreign policy and too little domestic policy, or they simply do not understand how important the US role is in much of the world today. America's diminishing resources and capabilities were evident just a few days ago when President Obama unveiled a new strategy for a smaller and cheaper American military. The US will reduce its military in Europe and shift more of its assets to the Asia-Pacific region to counterbalance China. Washington will also avoid future involvement in long and costly peacekeeping and state-building operations. Unfortunately, US global downsizing could become a recipe for greater international instability. Without American leadership, several regional crises could escalate as ambitious regional powers challenge Western interests. This can result in miscalculations and conflicts that may not be easily resolved. In 2012, we are entering a more dangerous and unpredictable world. The coming era, I believe, will be neither unipolar nor multipolar, but increasingly non-polar. The prophesied decline of the West is unlikely to be accompanied by the rise of the BRIC countries Brazil, Russia, India and China, as regional power centers. Brazil has no regional reach, and its economic power has little military projection. Russia is a declining power, dependent on oil and gas revenues, and compensating through imperialist designs on its vulnerable neighbors. India, much like Brazil, has limited security projection and also faces separatist ethnic, regional, and religious conflicts that will continue to challenge the country's national integrity. China is a very careful power that will not be drawn into conflicts that do not affect its immediate interests. Beijing will gradually extend its economic and cultural influence while remaining dependent on external markets for its economic growth. A non-polar world is intrinsically more unstable than one revolving around credible global leaders. In sum, I believe that the US remains the essential global factor, and the coming year will provide a major test for Washington and for the United States, a test whether the US Congress and the US President can work together to simultaneously revive the American economy and at the same time maintain America's global role. It is time to test the Bugajski hot seat. And our first guest today is Albanian Prime Minister Sali Berisha. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome to my first show, to Bugajski Hour.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a privilege for me to be the first.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Albanian Screen. Without any elaborate introductions, because I believe you are probably the best known Albanian, not only in Albania, but anywhere in the world. Let me jump straight into the questions, and I have several specific subject items I would like to cover. But let me begin with a bit of recollection. I first came to Albania, and you probably remember, about 21 years ago. Albania at the time was in the middle of this transition period. The first multi-party elections took place in March, I remember '91. And I remember you very well, Prime Minister, as one of the leaders, the major leaders of the democratic opposition here, that helped to lead this transition from communism to democracy. And I do recollect one particular press conference that you gave with all the foreign journalists present. And I remember very distinctly you saying, it is time for Albania to move away from its bunker mentality. Let me ask you, 21 years after these dramatic events, some of which we saw on the screen, are there still bunkers that Albania needs to remove? Are there still obstacles in the way to Albania joining the global and European community?
I believe 21 years later, this country is far from that time, 21 light years. No country has changed more and most. At the same time, having or following the time, it's not easy. It's a very difficult journey. So, there are so many things to be addressed. But I do not believe that things are coming now from the bunker psychology. You have to bear in mind, Albanians are very strong people with their psychological pattern, studied by the greatest scientists and scholars of psychology, which not everything could be blamed or could be addressed to the banker's time. So when I see the energy, the explosion of energy to this nation, very little remains for me to be linked with the past.